Well, we finally got some epic, huge news revealed to us about Shattered Space. It's been insane how quiet Bethesda have been, only getting a few trailers, whispers, leaks. But finally, we can really dive in and dissect gameplay, new weapons, armor, storyline. So much stuff is revealed in this 9-minute video that we just got. And we're going to rip it apart, see what we can extract and find out, and what it reveals for us all, and what in the ways of what can we expect from this DLC, which for many of us we probably already own, as we have premium edition, so we'll pretty much get this for free. Well, not for free, but we get the DLC without having to throw out extra coin at the moment. So I'm going to be going in quite a bit of detail throughout this. The plan here is to play through certain sections just so you can listen to it in its entirety, and then we're going to go through and review these sections and break them down and see what we can extract from them. Come along for the journey, let's get into it.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. It's been an incredible journey since Starfield launched last year. I want to thank all of you for making it the biggest launch in Bethesda Game Studios history. Your continued support and feedback drive us to making Starfield the best experience possible. Since launch, we've added new features, technical enhancements, fresh content, and the newly released Rev 8, Starfield's first ever land vehicle. Now we're expanding Starfield's galaxy with a brand new, completely handcrafted world and deep new storyline. This September, we're launching Starfield's first major expansion, Shattered Space. Today, we're giving you the first look at the mysterious homeworld of House Faroon. So let's dive in and explore.
So this first section is a bit more of a recap of what we've sort of experienced in Starfield over the last 6-8 months or more, and this includes the functionality. Here we have this shot of New Atlantis and Neon City and the Frontier, of course. Now this is where they talk about the Rev 8. The Rev 8 has been out since August, and the modding community has done so much around this. Now this is cool to see this little snippet here, because what we can tell just from this little section here is that nearly all the assets around Faroon or part of this DLC are all going to be new, which is going to be huge for the modding scene because we're going to be able to strip these out, add them to the outposts. There's going to be a lot of cool stuff that comes from this. But also, most importantly, note how we have a huge Class M ship just to the right, and you're going to see this throughout this demonstration. Now, what's interesting about this ship is that it is unlike any other Class M ship that we've seen. It's not the Faroon legendary ship. This is something entirely different. So it'd be interesting to see if this is something we find in space or what this will actually mean within the story. Here we have another view of that same Class M ship just on the other side. But you can see the structures again look very different to what we're used to. And just in these scenes, like one thing I think they've done really well with a lot of the, at least within this presentation, is the lighting seems to be much, much better. But visually, it looks very appealing. The new DLC. Here we go. So this is the next section. We get a little bit of a cutscene. So we'll listen to this and come back to it.
The fate of our house was written among the stars. The great serpent tells us there is nothing to fear.
Do not for.
At least, not for those who walk the path. You will rise as Faroon.
So we're just going to break this bit down. So here we have a new space station. This space station looks distinctively different to a lot of the space stations that exist within Starfield. So some of these assets look new. Here we have a scene where we're actually inside the space station. We can see something's horribly gone wrong. But this is going to be a point of interest or a part of the main storyline without a doubt. This is probably most likely going to be giving us a lot of information about how things got this way. One thing we'll note is that throughout this reveal, there's a huge focus of cave and cave networks, and particularly certain structures. So there's some sort of deep relevance or some sort of object or something we've found within these caves that to me plays great importance. Part right here is very interesting because these look like sort of test vials or test tubes, and inside it looks like the new type of enemies that are like almost water spirit elements or humans encased in some kind of spirit energy. Not sure what you'd call it just yet, but these are particularly interesting. They have some relevance probably towards that. This is what I'm talking about. You can definitely see some of the relevance between those sort of test tube things and these new enemies that seem to be a part of the rift or the break between the realities. And here we have this beautiful shot. So this is where we're going to be spending a lot of our time around this area. And we can see on the left, we do have a huge Class M ship, which we can definitely confirm because on the left, we can see the Class M engines. And in the center of this area, we can see that main Varun government building. And this is the crater.
We love Starfield's massive open galaxy, but from early on in our planning, we knew we wanted to introduce a more secluded and handcrafted location, similar to what you've seen from our past expansions. There's so much mystery to House Varun, and because they've so thoroughly isolated themselves, it made them the perfect faction to explore in a completely self-contained experience.
And so you arise, one of the promised of House Varun.
From the minute you arrive on Varun Kai, the story never sends you off planet. You're free to leave at any time, but the story is fully centered around life on the Varun homeworld.
Everything you discover, every location you visit, every side mission you seek out, it all tells the story of what happened here and how the Varun people have survived, cut off from the comforts of the settled systems and the rest of humanity.
Vindicator. Harbinger. Reverend.
Promised.
So I do love the look of some of these sceneries. However, you will note nearly all the creatures we see within this 9-minute preview are already existing with the game pretty much. So that's one thing I was hoping for, is to see new creatures, but we don't really see any new creatures yet. However, I will note, I don't think I've seen these creatures with the horns. Let me know if you have. It's a good chance I have because there's, I don't know, 300-600 different creatures or whatever. But we definitely have most of these creatures within the game, slightly different colors or variations, but they're pretty much there. However, in this shot, we can already see a couple of different points of interest. So just quickly with the Varun, we have to remember that in 2230 is when Varun first appeared, and they were a peaceful faction initially, and there was diplomacy between Varun, United Colonies, and Freestar Collective. Then 2240 is when peace ended, and House Varun launched the Serpent's Crusade, which was a violent war against all the non-believers, so against all factions, which led to a 23-year conflict that ended in 2263. Another key point is they lost their leader, Jinan Varun, and this passed down to his son, Jerick Varun, who sued for peace. And this is what caused a bit of a rift between the different factions. The Zealots rejected peace, continued pretty much on their own, doing the same sort of aggression, nomadic behavior, while some of the more peaceful factions of House Varun retreated into isolation on their home planet, which we know is Varun Kai. We won't go much more into the lore, but just to give you a little bit of backstory. Here is a cool scene because we get probably one of the main leaders of one of the factions in the back there. And then on the left, we have some new armor. To me, it looks like a new helmet, new armor on the left and right, actually. So here we have a lady in that sort of spirit form. And I'm wondering if she might be the face to the voice we're always hearing narrating to us in these trailers and demonstrations. So this part is pretty important because we can engage with this content at any time within the playthrough, assuming you have a ship that could get to the location. So technically, you probably will be limited. You will have to at least have something better than the Frontier. However, from all the footage we've seen, they always show the Frontier coming to this location, landing at these locations. So perhaps it is much closer to Alpha Centauri than we realize, but I suspect this is further out and you will need a much more advanced ship to get here. However, it does state once we are here, we get to choose to engage with this and get completely immersed in it. Or if we choose to, at any point we can leave. I would almost suggest to get your character quite high up or reasonably leveled with good weapons. So when you come here, you can enjoy it, soak in the scenes. But just something interesting to note, it's cool that we get to choose to engage with this whenever we want, giving it that true RPG sort of feel. Just jumping back a little bit, we have these amazing, gloriously looking new points of interest or aspects to the DLC, whether this be an altar or almost a gateway or something. But the lighting and visuals seem to be superb for the new DLC. The other cool thing to focus in on is we've got a nice new point of interest in the back, but this whole world has been designed with vehicles in mind. So we'll be interested to see what kind of roads or what kind of differences that will have in terms of navigating this with the vehicle. Just quickly right here, we can see here quickly we get this new kind of attire or jacket. That's going to be cool to be able to grab ourselves.
Vindicator. Harbinger. Reverend.
So to me, it's almost like she's naming like enemy types or something. At least just when I hear that, it kind of sounds like she's naming something tangible. But we also get little interesting snippets as we continue to build this theme that a lot of this is based around experiments, some kind of technology or something found either deep within the earth or within space, which might have come through this rift. As around the rift or within the crater, we see these crazy metallic looking objects, as well as a base built into the crater or into this area that seems to be the key location potentially to unlocking and understanding what all this craziness is. And we have this cool continued theme in this image of the religious aspect to Varun. And this is a unique colored Varun suit as well, identifying to a certain element or faction within the Varun.
One of our main themes throughout the base game is humanity's search for knowledge. Shattered Space is still about that search, but it's also about what happens when it goes too far. It's a very extreme pursuit, and it has backfired horribly for the people of House Varun.
My brother Qasim has been missing for days. I'm beginning to worry that something terrible has happened to him.
So just breaking down this next bit. So they give away a few things here. A lot of this is their own doing, but wrapped in with something else that they've found, that they've sort of tried to combine, whether it be a part of the serpent, which we'll have to find out what that is. But you can see the continued theme of experiments and where things have tragically gone wrong. But the best thing to highlight in this section is that this whole new DLC experience is going to be, for me, probably one of the best aspects of Starfield, because it's going to be much more gritty, a bit more horror sort of elements, sci-fi thrown in there, giving it that much more truer sort of space sci-fi experience that I really wanted from Starfield. And just overall, like a bit more of an adult theme, which should work really well for a lot of us, because that's something I think a lot of us would really like to get amongst. Now, this whole scene, it's important to understand that this is kind of like a manufactured scene in the sense that it's not really a cut scene. We're not going to get a little cut scene of us turning around and getting attacked. This is pretty much, for what I understand, probably a manufactured scene, just to sort of try to highlight what it will be like exploring some of these locations. And this is cool because it definitely gives a much more horrific, scary feel to it, where potentially things are going to be jumping out of nowhere, and melee is going to be a huge focus. You can see as he walks around that experiments are everywhere. They've used live humans or humans to do a lot of this, that they're trying to sort of fuse humans with something else. And we get a little bit of information as soon as we turn around, because we have this guy. Now note, this is something obviously human, because around the shoulders we get some red skin. It's almost like some sort of cyborg or some sort of fuse between a human and something mechanical or out of this world. And the most particularly interesting part, which may be something to do with mind control, is the thing around the head. That could be some kind of device. But also note, these NPCs are most likely going to be melee only, carrying in the left hand a retractable sword or knife. And then in a lot of these instances, we'll see them carrying a long sword, kind of machete looking thing. So that's a new melee weapon for sure. But we can see this guy is definitely a part of previous experiments, and it is a human encased in some sort of armor, cyborg thing happening here. This device here is shown quite frequently, but we can say it's definitely human made because it's got English writing all over it. Perhaps this is the device that caused the rift, but we'll find out, I guess.
Before the start of Shattered Space, a secret experiment involving grav drive technology went terribly wrong.
It resulted in a massive tear in the fabric of space-time that swallowed a significant portion of the Varun capital of Dazra. You arrived just a few weeks after the Vortex incident. It's still very fresh in everyone's minds. There's a massive crater in their city. Nothing has been reconstructed. People are still searching for missing loved ones.
Supplies are limited. There is so much work to be done.
The Scaled Citadel, the seat of power for the Varun government, is now trapped within a strange field of energy. Among those missing is Anasco Varun, leader of the Varun people and speaker for the Great Serpent. In his absence, the minor houses that make up House Varun are all vying for control over the faction's future.
The Zealots were once a part of Varun society. They want to continue the Serpent's crusade. They'll demand an inordinate amount of credits or firearms. Worst case, a seat at the High Council, or even the reinstatement of their house.
See, here we have again the frontier landing on this planet. So this is what is a little bit confusing of how close it is to Alpha Centauri. So this section is really important because it reveals a lot of the backstory when it comes to this new DLC. So what we can gather is that the grav drive experiment, which must have been taking place underground the city, goes terribly wrong and it causes a massive tear in the fabric of space and time. This incident is known as the Vortex Incident. This devastates the Varun's capital, Dazra. So this is going to be the planet we spend a lot of our time on, which ends up swallowing a lot of the city, which creates a massive crater. And this has completely destabilized the region. So here, this is interesting because they mention Anasco Varun, who might be a descendant of Jarek Varun, who, if you remember, created peace for some of the factions in the Varun. But it also gives us a lot of insight into a lot of the various Varun factions. There's going to be multiple, and we're going to have options to help some of these factions or choose to not help them, which is going to have a profound effect on the overall potential story of how this all works out. So this leads me to think that there are many different dialogue options or paths through navigating this DLC, which will require going through perhaps multiple new games to see it all or play it differently. But the politics of all the factions could be quite interesting.
The Zealots were once a part of Varun society. They want to continue the Serpent's crusade.
So there you go. So it mentions that the Zealots are still trying to continue the Serpent's crusade, which is basically just a war against everyone to bring everyone under control of the Serpent. So this is interesting. So there sounds like there's potential to help the Zealots reclaim more power within the Varun society. Here we also get a cool shot at one of the points of interest that we see quite often within this video. And here we get to see even some combat, which is pretty unreal. So this is the first time we get to see actual gameplay, and just pausing it here, we can see a new melee weapon. So here we get a little insight into combat with this new enemy type. So these are the Zealots, and you can see they are the ones that have that distinct black and white, new textured spacesuits. And we can see the new enemy coming with melee weapons, which is the new weapon we can see in his right hand, which we see very briefly here as well when they go to change weapons. But the interesting thing is he runs away and he's trying to create a bit of distance between him and this enemy.
All must serve, set me free. All must serve, all must serve, set me free. All must serve. Save me.
Varun Kai and Dazra City are like no other location in the base game.
From its inception, House Varun has been driven by a singular, unique vision. Because of this, Varun Kai has a completely distinct visual identity. We say it's very alien. You'll see this in the extraterrestrial landscape, gravity anomalies, and much more.
Here we get quite a few awesome shots of how cool a lot of this stuff looks. The DLC looks very nice visually. We can say that with a lot of confidence just through everything that we've seen so far. We're just going to back this up and go through this section. So what's cool about this section is that so much of what we see and experience is all handcrafted. So all these new assets, it's going to be huge for the modding side of things, for outposts, for gameplay. There's so much packed in here. And as we continue on, you get a really good feel of how it looks, and it looks amazing. Here we get another cool look of probably another point of interest, nestled up on top of a mountain of some sort. This part is particularly freaking awesome. So here we have some sort of method where you can jump through these little bubbles, turning on zero gravity. This could be huge for gameplay mechanics used within mods. Normally you'd have to have some sort of switch or some way of turning it on and off, whether it be a loading screen or like a switch in some of the mods cases. But here we can do it pretty much instantly. So I do wonder how they've done that. The other interesting part about this scene is that it's leading up to probably one of the centered locations within this crater. And here we get some sort of insight into what's behind this sort of section here. We can see all three characters holding some very important object. And the interesting thing is these people are actually humans, but from when and where, as they vanish within an instant. That just leaves us with a lot of questions. Interesting thing about this location is if we go back right very close to the start, you can see the house is on top of this area here. It does look like it is definitely within the crater, but for whatever reason, this location does hold a lot of significance as it's very close to what appears to be the center of the void.
Varun Kai is located in the Kabnik system, and it's not the friendliest environment. They believed the Great Serpent led them to Varun Kai, and their whole purpose in being here is to await its return.
You have no concept of what the Great Serpent demands of us. All must serve.
It's a dangerous planet, and a lot of the people have retreated to Dazra in order to survive and protect their culture and their way of life. Now you'll find areas of the planet that were abandoned and have since been taken over by Zealots, Spacers, and Crimson Fleet. And humans aren't the only dangers in the Badlands of the planet. With the line between reality and the vortex breaking down, creatures from the other side can slip through, like the vortex horror. When you disturb the barrier between our world and theirs, they can sense it, creating these honestly terrifying ambush scenarios.
In the base game, there's a lot of focus around ranged gun combat. You can engage in a firefight from way in the distance. In Shattered Space, we're closing that distance. Space is scary. Part of getting that across is amping up the aggression and the chaos of combat.
And once again, in this scene, they show us the frontier. So I'm wondering who this guy is. Most likely one of the heads of the main Varun faction, or house, I should say. And see, here again, we get a little bit of a glimpse of some of the creatures, but these creatures already exist within Starfield. But do notice the terrain of the overall planet looks pretty cool to navigate. Bit more desolate, desert, rocks, not too many trees. Here we get a shot of behind the ship, and you can see all around the major city, we're going to have heaps of places to explore. You can see a little chunk sign. I think that's a C from the chunk sign there as well. It's pretty interesting. But it looks like there's going to be a lot of little settlements scattered around the main center, the main city. So here we have an interesting shot of a very distinct Varun faction with all black, and then it looks like a spacer that has been murdered here. And this is another interesting aspect. We are going to have Crimson Spaces all within this same system. So it's going to be interesting how that's going to play into this dynamic. But also in this particular image, we have this crazy outgrowth of something. And I don't know if I've seen this in Starfield. I might have, but let me know in the comments, because this part seems particularly interesting, as if the Crimson are guarding this place, as it looks like this guy's on patrol. Maybe it's something to do with food, power, but it should have some relevance. Now, this next part that they talk about is critical, because this is how they're going to try change up the gameplay mechanics within Starfield, or at least within this DLC. So really, the main way they're trying to change the gameplay mechanics is through instant spawns. So it's certainly adding a much more challenging aspect to the gameplay. This is going to close space in combat, meaning depending on what weapons we have, we're going to have to try maneuver, create space, get a bit of range away from these enemies that are just going to pop up. So this in itself should add a really fresh new dynamic to combat. And another thing to note is that these creatures already exist within Starfield. So we don't see really anything new in terms of creatures, unfortunately. This scene is particularly interesting because we have a few snippets of being within the crater, walking on its surface. And we can see these strange metallic floating objects, which may hold more significance when we have a better understanding of what's going on. So they show us some of the new enemy encounters that we're going to experience. They also highlight that these can spawn out of nowhere, and they come from within the rift most likely, but they look like some kind of spirit enemy. But we must note that they do have these crystals inside them. So maybe that's where a lot of this comes from, or these experiments originated, is some kind of crazy crystals. Whether that ends up being the serpent or something related to the crystals seems to be kind of critical to the story. Even the creatures have these crystals in them. The crystals almost look like they're made out of the same material as the relics. So this is a really good scene of how they're trying to mix up the gameplay. This part is very interesting because they're talking about how they're trying to incorporate melee to be a much more significant system within Starfield. So this gives us hope, or kind of an insight to saying buffing the weapons. Let's hope we get some new animations. But we definitely know we get some new melee weapons and some enemies. And here we get to see the new grenade, which in itself is pretty wild. It has some of those crystals that we've seen, as well as it creates sort of like a gravity well. Here we get a little snippet of us encountering the new enemy, which we can see is pretty much going to be melee only, having a Varun sword of some type. It's almost as like a machete. But here we get a clear example of the new melee weapon. You can see that the enemy is quite fast and nimble as well. Part also solidifies that their overall theme is much darker, heavier, and more sci-fi. So this scene is particularly interesting because this almost looks like it's in the crater as well, but this tree has been consumed by the rift. And now this combat scene, the main takeaway from this is the new weapon that they show off. These creatures are already within the game, so nothing new there. The combat here is pretty much standard. Here we get insight to one of the new weapons, the Varun Starstorm. Basically, it's like a Varun minigun. Does a little bit of physical damage, which we can see represented by the 4, as well as we got 14 energy damage, and this weapon takes a heavy fuse for its ammo. We also can see that the knife is there in the quick slot. So for sure, we're getting a new weapon called the Starstorm, which looks pretty cool in the sense of how it operates. It looks really nice. The animation looks nice, and it feels like a machine gun, quite a bit of kickback. And then we again get some insight into the new grenades. There seems like there's a couple different types. These grenades might be more potent against things from the rift.
As you explore the city of Dazra and the surrounding planet, you'll learn the truth of what happened, become entangled in the political feud between the minor houses, and ultimately decide the fate of House Varun, a fate that could affect the rest of the settled systems.
We can restore the intended order of things.
Thank you for joining us for a closer look at Shattered Space. We worked hard to make this a journey you won't forget. We're incredibly grateful for your support and passion. Stay tuned for more updates as we head toward launch on September 30th.
So this last part's interesting because it gives us insight to how this will all work out. We will potentially have the option to make a very critical decision that is going to have far-reaching impacts into the Starfield universe. What I hope it is that we can make a decision that actually incorporates these new enemies to spawn within the world of Starfield. They might be able to just pop into existence. To me, that would be freaking awesome. But a lot of this will probably be focused in on which faction maintains control as a result of all this that's happened, whether it be the Zealots or the more peaceful factions. But I do hope we get to see some of the new enemies spawn outside this system, as well as hopefully some new Varun ships and encounters. Here we have an interesting shot where it looks like 2 Varun from a different faction have been sacrificed, and we can definitely tell that these new cyborg enemies are definitely linked with the Varun Zealots. One thing we can say for sure though is that this handcrafted environment is going to be beautiful. So here we have a few interesting scenes, one of us driving down in the crater, as well as this weapon at the last second. Now this weapon that fires at the last second is firing directly at the force field around the main building. So this has a huge impact. So it looks like we found some way to apply this technology from the rift and use it against the rift itself, remove whatever is encapsulating main structure for the Varun. At least that's what it looks like. So that's very interesting. The animation looks amazing. The whole planet and everything about this DLC does look very interesting, at least from a visual perspective. When it comes to the gameplay, they tried to mix it up by having instant spawn in enemies, as well as a few different variations of enemies. But again, we've only got a little bit of insight still. We don't know how deep and different this world will be in terms of new creatures and enemies. But so far, from what I've seen, we haven't seen a lot. Definitely when it comes to creatures, again, I was really hoping for new creatures, but it doesn't look like we're going to get any, maybe by 1 or 2. But it will be fascinating and awesome to get really immersed within the Varun story, as it's one of the more interesting storylines within Starfield. And we'll finally get to understand what is the Serpent, or who is the Serpent, the origins, and where this all started. So it's going to be awesome to actually uncover that kind of lore, because the Varun story is definitely the most interesting. In any case, I'm so keen to see and get my hands on the DLC. Let me know in the comments what you thought. Are you interested? Are you going to be playing the DLC? Let me know if there's anything I missed. There's so much information and little bits revealed in this demonstration, but it's going to be epic. Thanks very much for watching. Peace.